Hello everyone, I'm back with another update here. This is August 17th, mid-morning. I delivered the load yesterday. I am still in Winchester, Virginia. The trailer has been dropped off at the facility. But due to the fact that the lights came back on several times in the last couple days that I described, I am here at the shop. They did diagnose it yesterday evening, and apparently it's another pressure problem. There is still air escaping from the system behind the turbo, I think they said. So obviously with the other exhaust leak that was so big, this problem was masked by that other problem. It didn't come up rearing its head until that other leak was fixed. We are going to look at it this afternoon. And the other problem was kind of in line with what I said. The sensor, pressure sensor, may have had too much soot on it. So it's those two issues. It doesn't seem like it's anything major. So I'm going to be here at the shop probably most of the day. I wanted to get a hike in, but I don't know if I will or not at this point. So getting into an update on the situation with the global weather. First of all, tropics have stirred a little bit in activity. We have a tropical storm off the coast of Mexico that has managed to get going. It is predicted to become a hurricane, possibly a major hurricane, before it gets up to Baja California. So the southern tip of Baja California could potentially be threatened by this system. Currently is several hundred miles west of Acapulco, Mexico, out over the Pacific. Apparently there is some warmer water close to the coastline of Mexico that's contributing to this system's development. So this is good news, though, for the Southwest, because this moisture is eventually going to work its way up that direction. Even though it may not hit as a hurricane up there, it will at least bring some moisture to the area that has been parched for so long. Probably next week or later this week. We have the moisture from that other tropical system last week that's still working its way up into Northern California and bringing some thunderstorm activity to places that usually don't see it, such as the Bay Area, California. Eastern Oregon has been getting some storms out of this moisture and points north up into Idaho. And this is being drawn north as kind of a bit of a river from the tropics of moisture being drawn northward by an intense trough to the west over the eastern Pacific. And it's coming northward around the east side of this ridge that's giving all the heat to the southwest. And as I say, this moisture from this tropical storm is likely going to be drawn northward in similar fashion in the coming days. Could bring some needed rains to the southwest. In contrast, over the eastern U.S., we have a trough, as I predicted, is developing, bringing cooler weather to the eastern half of the U.S. The front makes it all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico now from this trough. It's pretty far south. But all the talk is on the western heat wave, the 130 degrees at Death Valley. Of course, they're going to use that as proof of global warming, but yet in 1913, we had a similar scenario. And that was at a time when temperatures were cooler globally rather than warmer. So why is it that was the case? Well, in a cooler scenario globally, the high pressure subtropical high is more concentrated in one area and it gets shifted south. So the reason why it was in August rather than July this year is because there's no monsoon up to this point to cool things down in that region. There has been virtually no monsoon this year in Arizona so far. So temperatures have remained scorchingly hot all summer. Of course, they again will say it's global warming causing this. It's more due to an alignment of the jet stream, which I will get into more of. As I described in my last video, over the Pacific, we have a low that was off Kamchatka, Russia, that has moved into the Bering Sea now. It is a very strong system. It's raising up a ridge to the east of it, and it's creating a trough further east in the eastern Pacific, and this front from this trough goes down to latitude 30, which is just 10 degrees north of Hawaii. It's the northeast of Hawaii, this front, and it goes all the way down to within 500 miles of Hawaii, which is way south for August. So they're not talking about this. And of course, this system is poking that ridge up to the east, which is creating all the heat in the western U.S. And then the trough over the eastern U.S., which is forming in response to that ridge. Interestingly, over the Atlantic, tropical-wise, there still is not a whole lot going on, despite all the hype that it's going to get super busy. They named 2 other systems this week that really should not have been named. They were not really, I watched it on the satellite. Neither of these systems were significant. There were tropical waves at most. Especially Kyle. I don't know where they got that name from for Kyle. It was a weak wave of low pressure. It developed, as I said, off of Carolinas, moved out into the Atlantic. It really didn't have any circulation much to it. Josephine is pretty much dissolved. It got sheared apart, and there's still a cluster of showers and thunderstorms between Bermuda and Puerto Rico, Midway, and it looks like it's moving north right now, but there's not much to it. Further down, we have over Trinidad and Tobago, an area of disturbed weather in that region. but it's too close to South America to really do much. May move into the Southern Caribbean. We have a couple of other areas to the east of that kind of are pulsating, and they're thinking these are going to develop. So far, I see no sign of sustained development, but I will watch these systems. They are moving across the Atlantic, but they are pretty far south in latitude. It's going to be tough for these systems to develop at that latitude into anything tropical. As far as depression, tropical storm, or hurricane. And they're likely headed to the Southern Caribbean behind this other system. So, over the North Atlantic, we have an interesting pattern setting up. There's a huge low south of Greenland, which is dominating the whole North Atlantic right now. There's a ridge of high pressure extending from Scandinavia to Iceland, and this is shunting the lows. There's a series of low pressure systems moving across the Atlantic on a very southerly track for August, south of this bigger low. And these systems are being flung toward the northwest coast of Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. The first of these waves brought some rains to northern Spain, now moving through northern Italy, bringing some rains to the Alps, maybe snow at the highest peaks. The next wave is moving into northern Portugal and northwestern Spain now. There's a couple of other waves behind that, so there's going to be a lot of rainfall over Spain, over France, and northern Italy for the next several days, much more than they normally see in August. And of course, this bears watching for the tropical weather season, because if the westerlies are already beginning to shift south over the Atlantic this early, it may slam the door shut on the season sooner than expected if this trend continues on the tropical weather season. I know there's a lot of hype that the Atlantic is going to get very busy. I have yet to see that. There have been a lot of systems coming off Africa, don't get me wrong, but they're just not developing as in years past. And my theory on it not developing is because the water temperatures in these regions are not warm enough to sustain development, and they are lying to us about the waters being record warm. If the ocean temperatures are really record warm in these regions, we'd be getting hurricane after hurricane. I mean, the weather systems have been there. They're just not developing into anything. The energy is not present. So I suspect we're being lied to about ocean temperature anomalies in many places right now. For example, they said the Gulf of Mexico was record warm, and I talked to some people a few weeks ago when I was in Florida on the Gulf Coast by poolside. As I mentioned in the previous video, they said the waters were almost too cold to comfortably go in at the beach. And I sat there scratching my head. Well, it doesn't sound like the Gulf is record warm to me. It sounds like actually it's cooler than average. I mean, even if it was upwelling, on their maps, they have water temperatures in that region is 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above average. And from the way these people described how they went in the water, how they froze initially, tells me the water temperatures are actually only in the low 70s there at best. So unfortunately, I don't have a thermometer to fact check what these people are saying in the Atlantic, but the evidence is there that these storms are not developing. There has to be a reason they're not forming into hurricanes like they did in years past. There has to be a reason for it. They're talking about how busy the Atlantic season has been this year. In reality, it has not really been a busy season. We've only had two very minimal hurricanes, one of which I question was even a hurricane, actually. The other one developed at the last second into a hurricane before it made landfall. So in reality, we've really had no significant hurricanes yet this season. We're getting into the end of August. So to me, that does not sound like a busy season. It sounds like a relatively inactive one. Now, I know they've named a lot of storms, and I was thinking this morning, I have not ever seen a season that's been so fake in terms of how they're describing it. I use the word fake because most of the systems they named should not have had names. Plus, the weather patterns over the Atlantic right now suggest that the season is going to slam shut much sooner than average. The westerlies have already gone down to about 35 north latitude. There's not much of a window now for these storms to really develop without getting either sheared off or being turned eastward out to sea. Even that system south of Bermuda is beginning to interact with a front that's just to its north, coming down from a low that's moving off of Newfoundland around. This is part of the train of lows that I described earlier, moving across the Atlantic. So now we do have other systems moving across Africa, but again, these systems are at quite a southerly latitude. It remains to be seen when they emerge what's going to happen with them. And given the fact that these other systems have not been developing, unless the water warms up more, it's probably just going to move across the Atlantic. Maybe when they get, if they do make it, maybe when they get up, maybe off Florida, maybe they might develop into something, perhaps. Even that's questionable if they make it that far without being turned back east. So I still hold to my prediction of a relatively inactive season this year, in spite of all the hype. When the heat wave in the west breaks, it's going to break in dramatic fashion and go to a much cooler pattern when that happens. Because over the eastern Pacific, again, as I said earlier, we have a trough with anomalously cool weather making it all the way down to about the latitude of Southern California. So when this heat wave breaks, the pendulum is going to swing all the way in the other direction, and I would not be surprised if there snow falls in the mountains next month out west. So for further points in the east, Eastern Hemisphere. We have another low over eastern Russia, kind of that low that was over northeastern China, kind of rejuvenated. It's still there, bringing a lot of rain to eastern Russia, northwest of Vladivostok, that region. This low is moving east slowly. The monsoons appear to be winding down over India. Still some patches of heavy rains in these regions. It seems to overall be starting to diminish. We have another system south of Taiwan trying to get its act together, may turn into a tropical storm or even a hurricane before it hits China, similar to the last one there. So far, it just looks like a depression right now. And again, there must be some warmer water in that region, so that might, at the last minute, this might turn into a tropical storm or a hurricane before it gets on shore. But interestingly, there is no other activity there, tropical wise. There is a large blob of showers and thunderstorms to the east of the South Island of the Philippines, southernmost part. It's too far south to develop into anything. It's just north of the equator. So I'm going to contrast this. In 1983, I spent 6 months in Okinawa, Japan, part of a deployment when I was based at Pendleton. We flew in there in early August. There was a typhoon off Okinawa. And we got threatened with 3, 4, 5 tropical weather systems that fall in August and September. This year, Okinawa has not even been threatened by a single typhoon to date. It just shows you the contrast between in 1983 and now in the weather patterns, in how much activity has been in the tropics overall. So I remember flying into Okinawa, and I remember the clouds from the typhoon being off in the distance as we flew in. And that was in early August, first week of August of 1983. And that was after there had been an El Nino. In 1982-83, there was a strong El Nino. The oceans were very warm back then. So I'm just providing that as a contrast to what we've seen so far this year. Now, as far as Southern Hemisphere, of course, Southern Hemisphere is mostly ocean. Most people don't talk about the weather in Southern Hemisphere much. But there are some very powerful low-pressure systems. One is dominating the entire South Atlantic. It is a bomb cyclone that is delivering a ferocious blizzard to 60 latitude south on the zero meridian. Of course, nobody's going to mention that. I thought it was just interesting. This blizzard covers hundreds of square miles, probably over the ice from Antarctica, but it is a ferocious storm, and the front from it extends 2,000 miles northwest over the Atlantic, and it's affecting Brazil. Still, it's impacting Brazil, this front from this storm, northern end of it, and it's bringing record cold temperatures to places in Brazil. It's driving this air from Antarctica up northward. all the way to Brazil from this system. That's how powerful this system is. And I was thinking, man, if the Northern Hemisphere sees a system like this in the winter, I can't imagine how ferocious the snowstorm is going to be from it. And this brings me to something I forgot about the Northern Hemisphere. The pattern over Great Britain. We have a low pressure over Great Britain right now as well, which is bringing some showers and thunderstorms. But I was thinking, if this pattern sets up over the winter, Great Britain is going to receive huge amounts of snow. Because we have a perfect setup. We have a high over Scandinavia and Iceland, and we have a low to the south over the Bay of Biscay, over France. This would bring in cold air off the continent and moisture. Perfect recipe for a huge amount of snow in Great Britain. Be interesting to see if this pattern repeats over the winter. Also, massive amounts of snow to the Alps and to the Pyrenees in between France and Spain. Back to the Southern Hemisphere, we also have intense cold over Argentina as well. Lots of air from Antarctica being pulled down into that air, or northward into that area, say up into that area, Southern Hemisphere. To the west of South America, over the Pacific, we have another very huge system with a front extending thousands of miles northward. And this is going to probably affect Argentina and within the next couple of days. Be interesting to see what that does. Australia, we still have a low several hundred miles south of the continent, driving some Antarctic air northward toward the continent, bringing some cold conditions to the southern areas of Australia. We have, for New Zealand, the fine weather is about to come to an end, a dramatic end. We have a huge slug of moisture being drawn southward from the tropics, and it's aimed right at New Zealand. New Zealand is going to get some very heavy rains from this in the next couple of days. It appears like almost like an atmospheric river is setting up there. From the tropics southward. So they're in for some lots of precipitation, lots of snow in the mountains. I'm trying to think if I've missed anything. Oh yeah, South Africa as well is getting in on the act. There's a very deep area of low pressure, different than the one over the South Atlantic. This is a different system, several hundred miles south of Cape Town, and it's bringing some Antarctic air northward into the continent. Southern part of South Africa is going to get very cold from this system. And I'm trying to think if I missed anything. I think that pretty well covers the global weather highlights for August 17th, 2020. Getting into what I've been researching on mind control. I know that my last video I said, well, if anybody wants to make a living off of helping others, go get a real job. Well, I mean that in a way that I think there's a lot of people in that industry that are in it for the money. I'm not saying everybody necessarily is in it for the money, but many are. They're taking advantage of people's need for love in their lives or enlightenment or whatever else, and charging them huge sums of money. I don't see charging money for services in itself necessarily wrong. Of course, we all have to make a living. But what I do see wrong is manipulating people into thinking they need what they have, that they're the only ones that have it, and that if you want it, you're going to have to pay a large sum of money to get it. I am not against in itself charging money for services related to helping others. If that's our purpose in life, we should be paid for our time for that, as with anything else. Unfortunately, that's how this world is right now. It revolves around money. We can't get away from that. But the key is, are we really helping others if we're causing them to enslave themselves